Pennsylvania, we also had a settlement that removed, what, 300? I forget the number there.
178,000 to start with, and the fun thing there is that the state was responding to a brief of ours in court at a time when the case was still live before we settled. And the state said, listen, this is almost verbatim. I'm speaking colloquially only, but they said, we got this letter from Judicial Watch identifying 25 counties that may have been behind. We went to those 25 counties and we worked hand in glove with them to remove as many registrations that needed removing as we could. And together, we in the 25 counties removed 178,000 registrations. And there are other counties we didn't name who also were removing registrations. I mean, we sent letters to more than 25 counties, and some of them would write back and say, oh, well, we hadn't been removing registrations. Now we are. The biggest example, which didn't end up being part of the lawsuit, was Allegheny County, which told us that they removed 69,000 registrations upon receiving our letter.
So our letter said your registrations are out of whack, and they said, you're right, we're going to remove all these names.
Yeah, by the way, all these letters, they don't just say your registrations are out of whack. They say your registrations are out of whack, and we're going to sue you under the National Voter Registration.
Right. It is.
So it's a little more incentive.
It isn't an FYI. It's do this. You need the.
But yes, and so Allegheny County.
But in the case of
70,
Allegheny,
000.
the threat worked. You're saying, look, there's an issue here, and that's what. And to be fair to New York City and North Carolina,
hats off to New York City.
We're always pleased when they settle. So
Yes.
and by settling, they're not admitting they did anything wrong. To be fair to them, but the numbers are what they are. Colorado similarly settled.
Yes. Well, New York did sort of admit that they weren't doing what they should have been doing.
Right.
But Colorado settled. There's some controversy about what exactly did happen there, but they do seem to have improved,
Cleaned up.
And the statute says you can only sue if someone is not taking reasonable steps. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the statute doesn't say you got to remove 50%. It doesn't put a hard number on removals. It says it has to be reasonable, and reasonable. Any child. Asking for more ice cream can argue what's reasonable.
So so when you're doing your analysis, you get records that they tell the government how many people are registered or inactive, people who have been voting for a while, and then you kind of look at what their populations are, of eligible populations who, in theory, can vote. And so, unless you've changed your analysis, one thing that kind of triggers you is saying, wait, they got more people registered to vote than are actually living there and eligible.
Yes.
And that's probably a good indication they're not cleaning up their rolls.
Yes, and another pet peeve I'd like to address, if I could, is that when you're on the inactive list and you're waiting to be removed after 2 general federal elections, if you show up during that time period and vote, no problem. You can vote. So in my view, those inactive registrations are live registrations.
Until your name is removed from the rolls, you can vote.
If you can vote it, it's a registration.
And that's why the law frowns upon not taking steps to clean up the rolls, because that's obviously an invitation for fraud. Does it mean there will be fraud? No, but it's an opportunity for fraud, and the line I use is that dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections, and that's why that's the only reason the law is out there, because otherwise no one would care if the rolls had a bunch of extra names there. It's a pool from which fraudsters can draw to vote in other people's names, or more than once, or however you want to tame it.
And to be fair to the states, there used to be state laws governing all of this, and this was all federalized with the National Voter Registration Act. Good idea, bad idea, who knows, but it's what we have now and have to live with.
So some states enforce their own state laws to clean up the rolls, like in Wisconsin. They did that recently, I think under litigation, if I recall.
Wisconsin is exempt from the National Voter Registration Act. There are 6 states that are exempt, and don't ask me to rattle them all. But
Wisconsin and Oregon.
Wisconsin, New Hampshire.
One of those Northwest states. Yeah. I know you're all going to think,
something or other.
Boy, that East Coaster, he doesn't know anything about the West Coast, but out that way, one of the states is exempt.
Yeah, but just to get back to the point about, you can still vote these registrations. 5 federal courts have found that when you're counting voter registrations and you're trying to see if you have greater than 100% registration, you count these waitlisted votes, okay? No court has ever held otherwise. And you go to these fact checkers, and they say that we are not saying correctly what the voter registration rate is because we're counting the inactives. Excuse me, we and 5 federal judges are counting the inactives, and we're counting them for a logical reason, which is that those registrations can still be voted. So, you know, who's going to Snopes the Snopes people?
Yeah, well, the fact checkers are left-wing advocates and often partisan, and the left hates us doing this. It's one thing to go into court and have to face government lawyers, well-funded, obviously. There's infinite resources. But our cases often aren't just limited to state and government actors, but the left tries to interfere with or engage in our litigation as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, as I was saying, they're at war with this statute. They don't like the list maintenance provision. They tried to hamstring it from the outset. They succeeded for decades.
By non-enforcement.
And also by a messed up interpretation of what the statute says or actually doesn't say, that only recently was, finally rejected by the Supreme Court. But it's almost like when you're in my position, you talk about the media, you talk about the fact that one of their greatest powers is simply not to report certain subjects. Well, one of the greatest powers of the Justice Department is simply not to bring certain cases, okay? For me, the biggest delinquency in terms of enforcing the National Voter Registration Act by the federal government is bringing no cases in the past 15 years under that provision. Lawsuits are brought under other provisions requiring, enforcing the removal requirements and saying you can't remove this person or you can't use this data. The other lawsuits that increase the number of people who are on the voter rolls. But lawsuits to remove people who move to other states, there have been none, 0. And that is probably the most significant way in which the Justice Department has made war on this statute. They have 30 to 40 lawyers. Okay, we have 3 voting dedicated lawyers at Judicial Watch and a consultant. If we had their resources, we could bring these suits all over the country. There would never be an issue anymore of enforcing the NVRA. But as it turns out, we and perhaps 2 other outfits, but we in the lead, are bringing these cases. This is, for all practical purposes, the NVRA is our statute because it sure isn't the government's.
Well, it's a remarkable testament to not only your excellent legal skills and that of those of your colleagues, but to Judicial Watch generally, that millions of names have been removed or are set to be removed from the voting rolls thanks to this little old nonprofit here in Washington, D.C. And,
we are the People's Justice Department.
Certainly in this area, and it's more important than ever given, I think, the crazed rush to throw out millions of ballots into the mails. The least you can do is make sure that people are at the place that you're mailing the ballots to before you send them out or invite them to vote or register or whatever else they're doing. It's
exactly
outrageous.
Right.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.